So welcome to this special U.S. Wind Professional Development webinar, Communications from the Capitol, Current Events and Future Objectives, or excuse me, Future Opportunities. We're excited to deliver this content to y'all in support of our strategic objectives and Nuclear Science Week, which will be next week. Please note this webinar will be recorded. Participants can raise their hand during the Q&A portion if they wish to ask a live question. I will also be monitoring the chat, and I can relay any questions in there to the speakers during this presentation. Our speakers today will be Melody Rodriguez, the Director of Federal Government Affairs from Nuclear Energy Institute. Melody currently serves as the Director in this role of Federal Government Affairs for the NEI. In this role, she engages with policymakers, industry leaders, and stakeholders to strengthen nuclear energy's role in achieving clean energy, economic, and national security goals. She also brings extensive experience in regulatory affairs with NEI, where she supported member companies in navigating complex regulatory frameworks and advancing policies that strengthen the industry's regulatory environment. Prior to joining NEI, Melody was the External Relations Manager for Palo Verde Nuclear Generating Station, where she co-managed the station's external strategies to promote Palo Verde and nuclear energy's value proposition to local, regional, and national stakeholders. Her nuclear industry experience also includes roles in strategic and business planning, enterprise risk management, and communications at Palo Verde. In addition to her industry work, Melody has served as the Media and Public Relations Coordinator for the Arizona Super Bowl 42 Host Committee and has been an adjunct professor at Grand Canyon University's Colangelo College of Business. She received a BA in journalism and mass communications from Arizona State University with a minor in Spanish. She earned a JD from Pepperdine University Caruso School of Law. Melody is a member of the State Bar of Arizona. Andrew Neal is currently the Senior Director of Federal, Political, and Government Affairs at the Nuclear Energy Institute, where he focuses on advocacy on Capitol Hill and the administration. Prior to NEI, Andrew spent 8 years on Capitol Hill as a senior policy advisor on energy issues to Conference Chair Kathy McMorris Rogers and Legislative Director to Congressman Russ Fulker. Andrew is a proud alumnus of Washington State University. So without further ado, Andrew and Melody, let us kick off and talk about communications and engaging with political leaders.
Thanks, Bryce, and appreciate the kind introduction. And I always it's never lost on me that my colleague Melody is much more accomplished than I am. So it's always great to hear her bio. Appreciate the opportunity. Looking forward to having this discussion today as you guys gear up for Nuclear Science Week. I think, from our standpoint, Melody and I come at this and our pathway to NEI from a couple of different directions. So hopefully can provide some useful perspectives in that regard. So as Price said, I spent 8 years on Capitol Hill in a couple different capacities, but primarily on the legislative side for 2 members of Congress, both one from Washington State and then one from Idaho. So look forward to having the discussion and happy to be here. And I'll turn it over to Melody.
Thanks, Andrew. Like Andrew said, my name is Melody, and I work with him on our federal affairs team here. I've been on the team now for a little bit over a year. I was with NEI previously, though, in regulatory affairs. And before that, I was out at Palo Verde in Arizona. I don't know if any of you on here are from there, but it was a really good time. I was there for more than a decade in various roles, but mostly external facing, external affairs, things like that. So I'm really also excited to be here today talking to you guys. And like Andrew said, to come at it from a little bit of a different perspective, coming from the plant route to here versus the Capitol Hill route to here. So.
Awesome. Just to open things up, I think from our standpoint, it's always helpful just to provide kind of the background of the latest and greatest that we've seen on Capitol Hill. I obviously have a bias because I've spent a lot of time up there, but at the same time, I understand a lot of the knocks that our government gets, and right now as we're in a government shutdown, sometimes rightfully so. But in the nuclear space, we've had a really exciting past couple of Congresses, and I think. I don't know, Melody, if you want to go to the next slide. Yeah, exactly. To kind of show some of the, different legislative items we've seen, vehicles that has given us kind of the bedrock of what's allowing for some of these, I like to use the word revolution in the nuclear space. and so, as we head into this, I just want to lay a couple, background perspectives of when we're talking about different pieces of legislation. There's really, there's more than this, but really three types. So there's authorizing legislation that provides, or that's legislation that'll go through your authorizing committees that really allow for either federal actions to be required to happen. So, for example, a Russia fuel ban, that'd be an authorizing piece of legislation. Then you have other authorizing pieces that would be, federal grants or incentives or programs that need to be backfilled from a funding standpoint. So once those programs are authorized, then you have to appropriate to them, because an authorized program actually doesn't get any money. Appropriations comes in and backfills those authorized programs and allows for money to be spent and distributed primarily by your administration offices. So think of, if you're going to authorize the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, then you're going to appropriate money to it, and then DOE is going to end up awarding and funding those specific programs. But the authorizing language also sets the parameters of what the administrative function can and can't do. And we'll get more into the appropriation side of things, because that's the real hard dollars, and that's what really provides opportunities for you and your companies. And then there's the tax pieces. And, obviously we've seen tax front and center in the news of late. And so that's a different way of incentivizing, industries or behaviors, really. But acts in a little different way, right? Because it's instead of dispersing money, right, you are not taking it in. So still a financial incentive, but just in a different way of doing things and providing deductions as your company hits the end of the year. So with that, kind of happy to go through kind of the latest legislative items we've worked on and really are appreciative with our federal partners, right? As you go into these offices, one thing that members of Congress always like to hear, especially when they've helped you out, is thank you. So we are incredibly thankful for their focus and and attention to our matters, and through that we've been able to be pretty successful. So the first one is, in the 117th Congress, as many of you followed, as we had kind of the Biden administration landmark legislative items were the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or Build Back Better, as we also heard a lot of, and then also the Inflation Reduction Act. In the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, we saw really two big priorities or opportunities be set up for the industry. The first was the establishment of the Civilian Nuclear Credit Program. This was $6 billion to help at-risk reactors. This money was utilized to help with Diablo Canyon. It also, I think, a portion of that also went to the Palisades reopening. So that was opportunities for Congress to come in and protect critical existing nuclear infrastructure. While that was happening, we also saw a different pathway of legislation happening, which was the IRA, which then set up what ended up being the 45U nuclear production tax credit. This is important to differentiate from, because this happened right around when Build Back Better happened, and then there actually ended up being some extra money in the Civilian Nuclear Credit Program that we'll talk about as we head into the 118th Congress. But with the IRA, we had that 45U tax credit set up, so a production tax credit that allowed for per how many kilowatt hours where are used. If you have a financial need, meaning your reactor is at risk of closing, or there's a metric of how you can access it, because not every plant can. You can then utilize that credit at the end of your the end of the year, and that's really helped stabilize the nuclear industry, the existing fleet. It really stopped plant closures and allowed for many utilities to start thinking about new nuclear or even more nuclear at your plant. So right, that's where you're starting to see power uprates, restarts, etc. We also saw in the IRA the establishment of they were technology neutral production tax credits and investment tax credits. That's also helping with these uprates, also helping with potential restarts and even new nuclear, advanced nuclear, your next generation of reactors. That's critical. So that tax credit actually was an uncapped credit that allowed for production to meet a policy goal of carbon reduction. So that really got folks start thinking about how they could start putting business plans together, utilize those credits, and start looking at new and advanced reactor concepts. The other way the federal government has incentivized new and advanced nuclear reactors is the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program. So the IRA also helped fund or provided additional funding to the different projects. There's kind of a couple different tiers. The tier 1 projects you hear a lot about in the news. That's the TerraPower project that's partnered with Rocky Mountain Power. And then you're also hearing about the X Energy project that's partnered with Dow Chemical. And those are your proof of concept, next generation reactors. And I think that's a good perspective of, how a concept can be, thought of and then funded, through the process. So, right, it was an authorized program that then has received steady appropriations over time. I think the important thing that Congress likes to see for programs like that is, the program was set up at a 50-50 cost share. So for every dollar of federal money they get, they also need to raise that on the private side. So it's kind of seen as a good governance, taxpayer protection that you're getting a 1-for-1 match to ensure that that there still is a private sector component to that piece. And then finally, we've had as you're looking at advanced reactors, we also have the HALEU advanced reactor fuel. Well, you kind of have a chicken and the egg thing because no one's going to build the reactor without the fuel, but no one's going to develop the fuel without the reactor. So the governments come in to incentivize that HALEU fuel to try and set up new markets, which is really important. And it's important that Congress has been funding that for quite a while, especially as we've seen that the only commercial supply was Russia, which now no one's going to be accessing or utilizing as we move away from there. And we'll have more to come on kind of the Russia component. But with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Melody to look at the 118th Congress.
So maybe I'll pick up where you just left off on fuel and talk a little bit about kind of what happened during last Congress that moved us forward a lot in fuel. So several steps were taken to strengthen our domestic nuclear fuel supply. And so first, in FY24 appropriations process, there was a supplemental where Congress allocated $2.72 billion to build out our advanced nuclear supply chain domestically. But that money was contingent on there being some sort of legislation passed that was that banned Russian fuel. And so I think that supplemental, was like December 2023 that we learned, like, great, we're going to get $2.72 billion for the domestic, supply chain for fuel. And then I think in about May is when that Russian ban came through. So that was called the Prohibiting Russian Uranium Imports Act. And it was signed by President Biden, like I said, later that spring 2024. And so what that did was it banned the importation of Russian uranium, the low enriched uranium and natural uranium. So that whole bill also includes a waiver process, which would allow limited imports until 2028 to prevent immediate supply chain disruptions, right? Like you guys know, you can't just say, hey, we're going to cut off Russian fuel today because we're planning fuel years out in advance, right? Like you can't just do that. And Congress really understood that and worked with us on a process where we could wean off of Russian fuel and hopefully not cripple the industry at the same time. So that was really great. And like I said, that legislation unlocked that $2.72 billion in federal funds to boost the domestic uranium enrichment industry and secure a domestic supply of high assay, low enriched uranium, HALEU. for advanced reactors. And so those funds are directed to the Department of Energy, and they specifically go toward implementing the Nuclear Fuel Security Act, which aims to expand the U.S. capacity to make HALEU fuel and ensure that there's a reserve of uranium here for, U.S. reactors, our allies. And so that's how all of those kind of pieces worked together in that Congress. It was like a puzzle, and it all came together to try to move forward the supply chain. Like Andrew said, there was authorizing language, there was appropriating language, like, okay, now let's actually get the money there so that we can do something. And so that's kind of how it all came together.
Hey, Melanie, I would add just one thing too on that. We established that civilian nuclear credit program in the Build Back Better, but since that tax credit came in and the existing fleet now had a different way of being preserved, that excess money was used for the Nuclear Fuel Security Act. So we took already appropriated money, repurposed it. The argument for that program to be set up was to save the existing fleet. What's a way for the existing fleet to be hurt would have been not having fuel access. So that argument was made, and then we saw that emergency appropriation. And sorry, Melody, back to you.
That's fine. And talk about, Build Back Better and the civil nuclear credit program. Just want to make sure we caught that money did in fact get used. I think it ended up being used during the 118th Congress, but that was you saw Diablo Canyon, PG&E say, actually, we're going to restart Diablo. It was slated to close in, I think, 2025, soon. But no, it's not going to close. And then you saw Holtec get money for Palisades to restart Palisades as well, which is well on its way to restarting. So that money that we got during, the 117th Congress, we saw in the 118th Congress get awarded and make some really big wins for the nuclear industry. It's great to see some plants that were going to be, one that was going to be shuttered, stay open, and one that was closing, get reopened here imminently. So
MC Hammond in the chat, that's a very good point. LPO was used, Holtec used the LPO money, but they looked at CNC for a bit. So great catch, great point. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so however, in the 118th Congress, I think that the really big star, what I think maybe got spoken about a lot more, was the Advance Act and the passage of that. So the Advance Act is, I had to write it down because I can never remember, it's the Accelerating Deployment of Versatile Advanced Nuclear for Clean Energy Act. Advance, because we love an acronym on the Hill as much as we love it in nuclear. So the act was actually introduced in 2023 in the Senate, but there was an accompanying bill in the House called the Atomic Energy Advancement Act. These bills had huge bipartisan support. Eventually it became the Advance Act. That's what was signed, what was passed and then signed by the president. But you should know that the House passed it, I think 393 to 13. Like you don't hear margins like that really on much legislation these days. There's not a lot, that has such bipartisan support. And I think in the Senate it was something like 88 to 2. So huge support for the Advance Act in the nuclear industry, and we're so supportive of that. And the Advance Act, really is quite helpful. I mean, to this day, and we'll talk about, when we talk about moving forward, what is there to do? There's a lot of implementation from the Advance Act that we're still working through. So what was in it? It was things like a series of provisions that were aimed to reduce the cost of regulatory reviews with the NRC. It looked at reforming licensing generally at the NRC and looking to streamline and make efficient some of the licensing processes for advanced nuclear technologies, such as microreactors and SMRs. It encouraged the deployment of new nuclear facilities on brownfield sites. So like the coal to nuclear kind of thing that you hear, that kind of term, some of that. It also established a separate regulatory framework for fusion instead of fission. So kind of broke the two apart. And then there was a lot in there about workforce, and it addressed, kind of workforce issues by allocating resources and supporting the recruitment and retention of personnel at the NRC, recognizing, as we all do, that workforce is, always going to be something we need to remain focused on if we're going to advance the nuclear industry. So, like I said, I feel like the Advance Act was kind of the star. It's the thing that definitely got the most airtime in the last Congress. And to this day, it's super important. We're so appreciative of it, and there's a lot of work left to do. But there were some other really cool things that happened in the last Congress too. And one other thing that I want to bring up is the 40-year reauthorization of the Price-Anderson Indemnification Act. That was in July last year, July 2024. And it's a lot of words, and a lot of us don't necessarily deal with this day to day, but it's really, really important. This act was actually, it's a federal law that was first passed in 1957 and has been renewed multiple times since then. It has to be renewed. And it governs the liability issues, liability related issues for all non-military nuclear facilities constructed in the US before 2026, which is our domestic fleet, right? And so it's really important. It was a huge, huge deal to everybody, really, quite frankly, in the nuclear industry, the utilities. And so getting that to be reauthorized for 40 years, that's a pretty long time too, was a really, really big win for the industry and something we're so appreciative that we could work with Congress on. I'll toss it to you now, Andrew, for 119th.
Thanks, Melody. And I like to say the 40-year reauthorization of Price-Anderson Act gave Melody and I our retirement dates. So it's nice to know when we'll be done. Bad jokes aside, so in the 119th Congress, and that's where we currently sit, all focus has been on reconciliation, right? You hear about this in the news. It's been retermed the Working Families Tax Cut Act, but more folks know it as the One Big Beautiful Bill. That was, really the Republican only tax bill to reset different priorities as the way they see it. And it should be noted too, the Inflation Reduction Act on the other side of things was the Democrat reconciliation tax bill to where they set priorities the way that they would like to see things. And so, I think from a reconciliation standpoint, without getting too far in the weeds, because we could start talking about the bird rule, bird bath, bird droppings, but instead we'll just focus on just the high level metrics. The requirements to really do it is you need to have both the House, the Senate, and White House to be the same party. And the advantage that you see there is then you can pass a tax bill, you can reconcile the budget really up to 3 times, but historically you really see 1 per Congress due to how hard it is to pass anything. But you don't need 60 votes in the Senate, so you can pass the filibuster. So as a result, when those stars align, whether on either party, you can really do some pretty substantial tax policies. And I think folks in Congress like to say, tax policy is a reflection of your priorities, right? You can incentivize, whether different opportunities on the family side. You can prioritize different infrastructure investments, and so we saw Republicans in the energy space really focus on really a lot of deficit reductions from the IRA, where you saw large investments put into the clean and renewable and baseload power supply, and then on the the Republican side, they looked to kind of narrow and tailor some of those provisions to really incentivize the things that they want to see be built. From our side, the nuclear specific side, we saw a large focus on baseload power or reliable power. And through that, we knew at NEI that, if the Republicans took the House, Senate, in White House, we were going to be relooked at. Every provision that was set up in the IRA, every priority. And so we started working really the August before the election to be in a hopeful good place if the stars did align for Republicans. They did. So as a result, we went to work really to show the benefits, incentives, and really infrastructure opportunities that the nuclear industry is providing following the implementation and really standing up of those credits. Through that, so the 45U credit at the end of the day ended up being unchanged. And I will say, out of the House, we saw significant reductions in the credit originally. And then by the time we got from House passage or by House introduction to House passage, we saw some significant movement on the nuclear side. The Senate then even took 45U and took it back to what it was originally passed for that credit in the IRA. On the tech neutral sides of things, they really rejiggered that credit to be more carbon or not more baseload focused. Narrowed down the use cases, narrowed down some of the times you have to start construction, but really left it on the nuclear side pretty unchanged. There are a couple things around the edges. The two credits we talk about there is 45Y, the now baseload focused ITC, and then 48E similar restrictions, which is or 45Y is the production tax credit, and then 48E is the investment tax credit. You would use those for different use cases depending on whether you want to build, whether you want your incentives to come after you build the reactor or before you build the reactor. So if you want it to come after you build the reactor or after you do a power uprate, you use 45Y because that's once you start producing electricity. If you want an upfront payment, you would use 48E to help lower some of those initial costs. I will say, from an industry standpoint, we were really excited where things landed. While those credits went from an open-ended credit to meet a policy goal of carbon reduction, they were capped, but capped in a way that can mostly be utilized for the advanced reactor sector, or at least was a smaller haircut than many expected to be. So provides us an opportunity to relook at those timelines if we need to down the road. We also were able to keep in place the way to monetize those credits. So it's something called transferability. So from the nuclear industry standpoint, we were one of the only generation sources that transferability, the way to sell the credits, is pretty critical due to some NRC requirements. Basically, how you would take it, how you'd be an equity stakeholder in a plant. And as a result, transferability allows kind of a way to more easily monetize those credits. So more money goes to the infrastructure side of things than the bank. We were kind of particularly the only ones that really had those restrictions. So we were able to really make those arguments to our partners at Capitol Hill and saw some really great treatment on the monetization side of things. That has really been the focus this Congress so far, legislatively, right? Everything from January 1 up until July 4th when that bill signed into law was, it was all reconciliation all the time. And we are really excited to see where things landed. I will say on Nuclear Science Week, if you're up on the Hill, reminding our Republican partners how appreciative we are of that bill is really helpful since that's still fresh in everyone's mind. You can also remind your Democrat partners that these were stood up in the IRA and that they were that we are still very thankful that these programs exist for the opportunities they provide for the industry. So very exciting time, something we're very thankful for, and something we continue to work on the implementation side of things. We'll get more kind of into what pieces we're still looking at this Congress, but on the ongoing side, there's an international bill called ANIA that's in the National Defense Authorization Act on the Senate side that we're going to continue to advocate for. There's also a financing piece of that. We have an ARC Act legislation to help with early movers. Appropriations is always ongoing, currently right now. And then obviously we have our NRC confirmations. But Melody, I know you have more on those pieces as well.
Well, we can get to those at the end. Maybe really quick before we move on to Andrew just talked about if Nuclear Science Week or any time really you're up on the Hill talking. I want to get to what does that look like and what are some of the tips. But before we do that, I just want to make sure right here we're talking about a lot of things that happen congressionally, but there is another way to effectuate federal policy, and that's through administrative action as well, right? And we've seen quite a lot of that happen this particular year. This presidential term, President Trump took office earlier this year and started signing those executive orders hot and quick. And quite a few of them actually were quite impactful for the energy industry and nuclear industry. Things like declaring a national energy emergency and unleashing American energy, establishing the National Energy Dominance Council. There was a council to assess FEMA. All these things, affect permitting, affect resources, affect the focus on energy and nuclear and the role that it plays in our economic stability and viability and our national security and things like that. But then even more specifically, in May, President Trump signed 4 executive orders that were specific to nuclear. They were called Deploying Advanced Reactor Technologies for National Security, Reinvigorating the Nuclear Energy and Industrial Base, Reforming the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and reforming nuclear reactor testing at the Department of Energy. So, there's, I could spend a whole hour just on everything that's in all those executive orders and all that it means for changes, for opportunities. But I think that maybe what's important to say is that, President Trump and this administration have been really supportive of nuclear as well. And we're always so grateful for that. And at NEI, we've been looking at how do we, there's all this guidance out there. How do we help, make things happen? And so, internally we've coalesced, kind of put together an executive task force and how we can best see what's coming out of these executive orders, and how we can best support. And so, we kind of see it as there being kind of different work streams. Some of it is on like NRC reform, obviously. Some of it is on the growth of fuel supply. And you're going to hear, like, these are some of the things I told you we've already kind of been working on, right? Like the Advance Act was about NRC reform too. And we've been talking about fuel supply for a while now. And so it's just kind of like the evolution. The Department of Energy deployment, Department of Defense deployment, used fuel policy, nuclear exports, and workforce development. So those are kind of the 7 major areas that we see covered by those 4 executive orders. And I think that maybe that's all I need to say, because if not, I could go into really, really deep. But I just want to make sure that you're aware that in addition to all the things that we just talked about right here coming out of Congress, there's also executive orders that are helping to effectuate federal policies, and how we move forward in nuclear industry. All right, Andrew, do you want to take a stab at engaging with Hill staff first, perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Melody. So, obviously, as you guys head to the Hill soon, Melody and I kind of come at engagement with Hill staff from a different perspective, just because she's always been a great advocate. And I, in my past life, was in the chair that advocates came into. I think from a high level standpoint, right, it's always important to be on time or even be early, right? Days get busy. You never know what kind of curveballs are going to come your way when you're in a congressional office. And so, oftentimes if you're there early, if things are running on time or ahead of time, people will take you early. And that just kind of frees up everyone's day. It also allows you to get your next meeting, in a more effective way, right? Because you're going to be in different buildings. You might be on different sides of the Capitol. Getting there on time is important. Being concise, and really getting your kind of talking points down of what you're trying to get accomplished is really important. These meetings can go anywhere from 5 minutes, especially if the member's involved, to 30 minutes at a staff level. So you never know how much time you're going to have. So I always front load what's most important. But also don't be upset if you're going to end up meeting with staff. Staff do most of the work. I'm biased. But they also, they're writing memos, they're writing backgrounders, they're writing up their meetings, usually for end of week weekly report where that member is going to review on his or her flight home. And so it's just really important, that you utilize your time effectively. But also, right, if you're from the state, if you're from the district, having that person lead and speak is really important. Not only, right, are you someone that works for a company that provides jobs, tax revenue, tax base to those communities, but you're likely a voter, right? Your family could be voters. At the end of the day, that person's trying to get reelected. So it is important. They will give you more time, likely than someone that doesn't have that tie or or that tie.
Yeah, and context is key. Like
Please.
they need to understand like this issue that they've maybe heard Andrew talking to them 12 times about or me. They're like, oh, I get it. I see how that affects, my constituents and who I represent. They need that context that only you can provide.
Absolutely. And then relationships, right? Especially if you're from there, you're building a relationship over time, continuing outreach, keeping that steady drumbeat of what's important, because the squeaky wheel often does end up winning. And don't be shy to show up at district events, right? If that member or staff is home, and there's something that has a tie to your industry, that member or staff or office, if you care, they'll care. And so continuing to make those points, I think, is really important. Melody, from your side, I'm happy to turn it over to you.
Yeah, I was gonna just flip to the next slide too, just to make sure we kind of went through everything. But basically, you're there to help give context. You're there to help educate. Be responsive. If they ask questions, do your best to respond. It's okay to say I don't know the answer, and it's okay to say I'll get you that information. But they really are, like you're curious about them. You should show your curiosity, and you should also be responsive to theirs. Um, and obviously relying on personal experience is really why you're being brought in, right? Like you have that context, you have that personal tie. That is your strong suit in the room at that time. So I think that it's really important to share kind of your testimony, maybe for lack of a better term, your personal experience, your personal ties, and how you can help connect the dots for them. And then I think the last thing is to always just be thankful, because they really do, we said be on time, be courteous, all these things. They have so many people clamoring to speak to them. They are one representative for a lot of people, a lot of issues. Like it's not just energy and like, oh, gas versus oil versus nuclear going to come in. No, you have agriculture, you have workforce, you have labor, you have so many people trying to talk to them. And it really is like, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about this issue that is really important to us. And I think that goes a long way. So I think that's maybe the last thing I would say about that. And I'm going to move us on because we have one more slide to get through, and then I want to have time for questions. So what's next? Andrew, what about implementation?
Absolutely. So, right, you end up being successful. You have the Advance Act that passes overwhelmingly, right? It's on a glide path to being implemented perfectly. Once a law is passed, right, the actual administration and implementation of it is probably the most important, right? It's actually where you're going to see the effect of what Congress intended, of what those laws are intended to do. And so, I think from our standpoint, we try and look at it a couple different ways. We first want to make sure, are these rules and regs being written in a way that, for at least from us and our biased industry standpoint, in a way that the industry was hoping that they would be done. So, and if it's not happening, right, we want to work with our partners who help design those laws to ensure that it's implemented in the correct way, or provide guidance, to the NRC or DOE of how the industry would want to see those be done. So we do that through letters. We'll work with our congressional partners on oversight. For example, the NRC comes up at least usually once a year to meet with Congress, and so we utilize that opportunity to provide potential feedback to our partners on the Hill. And then, are these laws being, what did we miss, right? If there's still gaps in a more efficient regulator without sacrificing safety, or gaps on the DOE side of how money's being dispersed, what kind of feedback can we provide as a voice of the industry to try and at least either fill those gaps or have things be implemented in a more effective, efficient, and opportunistic way to see the results that were intended. So for the Advance Act, right, we saw, that bill be signed into law. And then, we've since seen those executive orders that Melody has talked about that's really fast, sped up the process of implementing the Advance Act. We like to say it's throwing gasoline on a process that was already ongoing. But we also, right, want to ensure that it's done in a way that's lasting, that has the operational benefits for both the regulator, but also you guys in your current roles. On the fuel supply side of things, we saw, a significant amount of money being provided by the government. Is that being utilized in the best way possible to help meet the goal, right? From our standpoint in the seat we sit in, right, this was emergency money to help with an emergency, an agreement, and our partners and membership agreed to, right, to move away from Russian fuel, and so how do we ensure that we're not having those gaps as money's dispersed to ensure we're actually building that domestic capacity, that we don't see fuel shortages, and that way we don't see rate increases. But that's kind of our next steps on that side of things. Melody, you want to go over the legislative opportunities?
Sure, there are quite a few, but we've kind of tried to highlight maybe a couple of the top priorities. One of them is the Mandatory Hearings Act. So this is actually an act that was introduced last year, and then or last Congress, and then reintroduced this Congress again. And that one is about removing the NRC's mandatory hearing requirement that was created by the Atomic Energy Act of 1954. And I think really it's been the industry position for a while that this would be a good idea. It would be removing a redundant process that neither limits opportunities for public engagement nor impedes public health and safety. So we see it as a huge efficiency gain. So that one is introduced by Senators Coons and Scott. So that's one that we're looking out for. And then we're always looking to see the government get funded, and specifically in the energy space, because that's what we really care about. So the Energy and Water Development Bill is what funds the Department of Energy, for example, NRC, things like that. And we would love to see a bill get passed. Last year, FY25, we did not get new bills passed. We actually decided to operate under a continuing resolution, which kept us under FY24 spending levels. And so this year, I think everybody is hopeful that we could see, because things change, priorities change, resources change. We'd like to see new funding levels. But as you know, we're currently in a government shutdown. The fiscal year starts on October 1st. And so by September 30th, they have to pass, there's like 12 regular appropriations bills. One of them is the Energy and Water Development. And they have to pass those by September 30th to see the government get funded, and they didn't. And so then there's an option to do a continuing resolution, like I just said. And that the House has passed one, a clean or so-called clean continuing resolution, and it has not been passed through the Senate yet. And it's been a couple weeks, and I don't know, depending on what news cycle you're following, doesn't sound like there's an end in sight. So it doesn't look great. But we are, the House did, before this government shutdown, the House did pass an Energy and Water Development Appropriations Bill that for fiscal year 2026, that, was about, I think, $1.8 billion for Department of Energy, which is pretty good, and had some good funding in there for nuclear, some reprogramming of funds even for nuclear and advanced nuclear development and deployment. So we have not yet seen a Senate bill, which we would need to see the process move forward. But again, we're in a government shutdown at the moment, and so priority number one right now is getting the government back up and running, so that through a continuing resolution, so that they can continue to work on these bills and hopefully fund the government. So that's where we're at on that one. And then I don't know if Andrew, you actually are more intimately involved with the ARC Act, if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as we look to the future, the ARC Act is really meant to try and spur early mover priorities, or early mover of new reactors. And so Senator Risch from Idaho introduced it at the end of last Congress. And this is really meant to help, those first of a kind reactors come online. So it provides an incentive of up to 3 different projects of $1.2 billion capped if there's a 20% cost overrun. So kind of a different pieces to that, but it's really been seen as our best opportunity to incentivize these reactors so that the cost over time can come down, right? If you're the first one to move, your supply chains are standing up, your custom materials, all of that hasn't been realized yet, hasn't come down because there isn't that economies of scale, and so that helps us get there. While it tries to protect, the ratepayer from any increases they may see to a certain extent, but also, the taxpayer, because a certain amount of cost overrun would have to come before that is unlocked. So we're really excited about it. And we like to remind folks, right, that in the there are competing interests, as far as advanced reactor companies go, right? There are competitors in our country, but really, we're also competing against countries like Russia and China who have really progressed in the international market. And so that's something we don't want to lose that foothold in. Senator Risch has a unique perspective because he's the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So really sees that foreign influence, but also he sits on the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, where this program would be run, or at least have oversight over DOE, who would run that program. And I'll just quickly say, the other opportunities we have in that space too, that we have to work on is the XM Bank, which provides loans in the international market, and that's seen as our way to kind of compete with some of these state-owned enterprises. And then also USDFC, which is a newer program that needs to be reauthorized, and we're trying to hopefully expand some of the limitations it has in the nuclear space. But it's one of the only opportunities from an equity investment standpoint for the U.S. government to take part in incentivizing projects that or influencing opportunities that against kind of some of these other actors, to give us a seat at the table. For example, right, where you have Eastern European countries who are trying to move away from Russian gas, can we provide baseload power to those countries as we kind of realign that part of the world? And then Melody, I don't know if you want to wrap us up.
Sure. So the last couple of things that we're really, tracking this year are executive orders. There's the implementation of those 4 that I said, came out earlier this year, including all the ones before that, affect nuclear. And so working, on what we can do to support the industry, the administration, whoever it might be, as we, move forward in implementing some of these things, and then also monitoring for what other kinds of things might come out that either tangentially or directly impact the nuclear industry, from an executive order administrative perspective. So that stays top of mind for us. Also, NRC nominee confirmations. We saw Chairman Wright get confirmed onto the commission earlier this summer, and that is great. But as you know, the NRC commission is a 5-person commission, and there are currently 4 commissioners. And I think that the industry loves to see a full commission, because that means they can vote on issues, they can, help set the policy for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and we like to see that. So currently, Honey is up for confirmation to fill that slot on the NRC. And they just had a meeting or hearing about that last week. So we would like to see that happen this year as well. And yeah, those are basically kind of the biggest things that we're looking out for. There's a bunch of other little things too, but maybe these are the highlights of what we're looking for this year. So with that, I think that maybe we could open it up to some questions.
Yep, and I've been keeping an eye on the Q&A, and we do not have anything in there yet. So I will start us off with something of what I think might be the most important question. I understand that there are a lot of diverse perspectives and differing political parties and opinions that we have when we work on the Capitol. What are some words and/or phrases to use or avoid, depending on which individual in a political party you are talking to?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to start, and then Melody, tell me where I go wrong. Obviously, right, we saw the Energy Dominance Council be set up for this administration, right? So there's a lot of themes that have been coming out of both, the Dominance Council and DOE and the administration as a whole, right? It's around reliability, baseload, how can we assist with some of this new domestic manufacturing? So, right, I think trying to always tie together, the party or the administration with kind of the phrasing that they're using is always helpful. And then on the other side of the coin, right, when it was a Biden administration, carbon free was a huge priority of that administration, and so trying to tie in the benefits that we have on the nuclear side, because we have them both, right? We are in this unique perspective where we're not only carbon free, but we're also baseload reliable. We're always on. We're the perfect partner. If you're trying to win the AI revolution, that's what you need. You need us, and once we're there a long, long time, and we have a history of providing, producing, and showing those benefits.
Yeah, and look, I would say this. I've been working in the industry for, probably like 15 years now or something like that. Crazy. So I remember a time when the idea that nuclear was bipartisan was laughable. I think that you do tailor your message, like Andrew just said, right? Like there, more ways that Republicans want to talk about it versus Democrats want to talk about. But I would say that by and large, like there's a lot of agreement on what the value of nuclear is. Maybe you lead with this value, with this person, or with this office. Um, but I do think we're in a really unique spot, and I think Andrew hit it on the nail on the head. I just think that it's like worth noting, like this is very different, uncharted territory for nuclear, I think.
And right, I think especially we're talking someone that's kind of more on the moderate side of either uh, party, right? Bringing both benefits to the table, clean and reliable, or reliable and clean, right? It's they're trying to fight for the same moderate voters, which have the same moderate beliefs, right? So if you're what we call a majority maker, and you're one of those 40 to 50 seats that switches every couple of years, right, you're going to have a much more um, desire to hit both sides of your moderate base.
We've got one question that came through the chat. Has there been any movement on an executive order, specifically LNT or linear no threshold reexamination?
I don't know if there's necessarily a specific executive order to that end, right? We've seen a lot of talk in the news about that being a priority, I think, under the current executive orders, but I don't think we'll see, right, to have something that specific, it really has to be right a large ticket item for them to either message or for them to want to go down a pathway specifically of something that technical. But I wouldn't be surprised as these executive orders are ongoing that there isn't something in that world. Now, I will also say I'm not a technical person, so that gets above my head pretty quick. But I don't know, Melody, if you had any other perspectives to that end.
Same. I'm not a technical person. That goes over my head very quickly as well.
Spoke a lot earlier about uranium imports, what the importation percentage looks like, and what challenges we've had with importing them, especially with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, potentially kicking off higher enrichment and whatnot. What engagement, if any, have y'all had with tribal leaders, especially considering there's not been the finest of legacies with mining, especially out in the West? What conversations have you had with folks out there about potential restart of mining operations and or just other topics that you've had to address?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Right, Congress wants to see domestic enrichment, conversion, and mining. Right, a lot of our supporters for that legislation, especially on the Republican side, really want to see uranium mining come back, be profitable, and expand dramatically. I think of Senator Barrasso in Wyoming. He does not let us forget that is a priority of his. I don't know if we've had as much community engagement at that step yet, because we're still kind of waiting for some of these awards to come out. Uh, doesn't mean it hasn't happened. But I also think it's important, right, from a congressional funding standpoint, those incentives were really on the next two steps of the process, right? That's really to incentivize enrichment and conversion, because that uranium is pretty available. But if we're able to have more enrichment here, more conversion here, and more domestic opportunities there, it should spur more mining, which helps everybody out. Now, I will say we are always very, very supportive of community engagement at the earliest sign of production of even just trying to bring new opportunities at that level. And so we even have expanded that part of NEI significantly to try and help meet those needs, spur that, and I think they do a great job.
I was going to say, we have Andrew and I are here talking to you on behalf of our federal government affairs team. We have a state government affairs team as well. And they work with, obviously, you guys, people in the states, the utilities, you have, all the firsthand knowledge, whatever. We work with you on some of those kinds of initiatives and through the governors associations and things like that. But I want to remind you that we also have that whole aspect of NEI as well.
Have a question that came through in the chat. On the topic of what language to use, do we see any trends regarding a quote unquote common mission similar to where we were as a country for the moon landing or after 9/11?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually in that space, right? I think we've seen an all government, all hands on deck approach on the AI side of things, and so we're there to fulfill and help meet those needs. And we see that talked about all the time as we need an all government, all hands on deck approach to meeting the generation needs there. And I think we see a lot of bipartisan feedback that we are where folks hope we meet that generation need and capacity. And then I would also say one of the other exciting pieces we bring to the table, if you're going to say moon landing, a lot of folks are hoping for an opportunity to go to Mars. So NASA's actually really been engaging with us a lot too on opportunities for nuclear propulsion or nuclear, I guess, way of powering. And my technical background is going to really fail me here quickly, but powering those missions. And so we've seen increased engagement there too. So whether it's we're trying to meet and incentivize a way from a technological standpoint to meet those needs, or or just funding opportunities there too. And I don't know, Melody, if you had a different perspective.
Well, I'm just going to harp on that. I think that the race to beat China and Russia in AI is something that you hear all the time, and so it definitely feels a lot closer to something like the moon landing. And in the same breath, when you hear AI, you hear nuclear is very uniquely poised to help us in that race, right? It's clean, it's on 24/7, it's reliable, it's affordable. There's so much that it has to offer. It can be, if microreactors, it can be, dispatchable. Like there's so many different aspects to nuclear that make it so uniquely poised to help us win that fight, that battle, whatever you want, that unified mission, if that's what we want to call it. So I think AI is definitely maybe the closest I've seen this is personal experience coming to that.
Yeah, and to Melody's point, and from a geopolitical standpoint, right? We are only having a more bipartisan desire to combat the influence of China and Russia. Right? It's one of the few heavily bipartisan committees that we've seen stood up was the Select Committee on China that we're seeing really bipartisan proposals of combating their influence, both domestically and abroad, and so we play a role there too.
We have time for one more question before I need to close this out. Start with a general question that we have, and then I'm going to add also what I have on there. So a lot of discussion, passionate discussion, shall we say, about closing the fuel cycle, interim storage, and consent-based siting. With the news of Holtec abandoning plans for a private nuclear waste site in New Mexico, what lessons can folks take away for communicating and engaging with state and local leaders regarding nuclear waste? Understanding y'all are more on the federal side.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I prefer spent fuel, but because we will hopefully use it again. But I think that just only presses the need for our community engagement side of things, and just doing as much with local governments, with state governments, with city councils, mayors, at the earliest opportunity there is. And I think it needs to be a whole government approach. I think we look back at Yucca Mountain, where we had the local community that really wanted that, but then you have the new governor or really Harry Reid, who came in and made that a political issue. And so I think we have to cover all of your bases because there are a lot of communities that want us, right? And we pull overwhelmingly well around communities that have any of the current reactors. And so how do we build those relationships as we bring in that new opportunities in our space, which I think we're going to continue to have. And so again, our Katie Austin on our team, I'm a big fan of, and she does a great job trying to organize that engagement at an early level. And I think we're going to have big dividends paid off in the future. But Melody, anything else on your end?
And no, I think you covered it. I think consent-based community early and often is just really important, and staying connected through the whole process, right? Make sure we don't accidentally at some point like start having different ideas. We need to stay connected the whole time, and it's a full-time job. It takes a lot. It's really important work.
All right, folks. Well, that will wrap us up for today. Thank you for attending this special U.S. Wind Professional Development Committee webinar. I'd like to thank our speakers again, Andrew and Melody, as well as our host, Caitlin Ricola, also from NEI. This webinar recording will be uploaded to the U.S. Wind YouTube channel, as well as to the U.S. Wind PD library. Our committee looks forward to continuing the conversation and delivering 2025 Professional Development Week next month. The theme this year will be What's New? Domestic and International Changes in Nuclear. It will be held the week of 11/3. We will have PD Library on-demand activities available Monday and Friday that week, as well as 3 more webinars. The save the date announcement has been posted on the US Wind website. Keep an eye out for registration links, as well as specific times for the webinars. If you're unable to view them live, they will also be recorded and uploaded after PD Week. We look forward to delivering more great content to y'all next month. Thank you, and go Vols.